All right, got the water, got some coffee.
Armed with coffee, we're at the beach. It's a beautiful day.
All right, quick bit of weather chat. So,
Oh no.
was checking in on the long-term forecast. I think we might be back in the club next week because this one, I don't know if we're going to get away with the beach if it's raining. So
A little ambient noise, that's okay. Could be nice. Rain
maybe it's on
the top of the van.
It's a tin roof. Like it sounds. see how annoying that is. It usually depends on the wind. Like if it's pretty rough, then it could be a bit much.
Becomes a wind tunnel in here.
Exactly.
Again, we're going for lo-fi. I mean, like that GG episode I listened to was like literally in the middle of a storm. There was like a bus stop that got blown away at one point.
But they were afraid they were going to die. So I don't know if that's...
Do you know how entertaining that was though?
For your art. Keep it going. Okay, yeah, maybe. All right, well, we'll see what it looks like next week. And
we keep the options open.
We can go from there. As I say, we've got the van upgrade, so we've got fancier windows, which is
nice.
That's a new one. Got some new bits coming in. Maybe I need to think about how I can make this into more of a podcast studio. Maybe that's the vibe.
That would require like more noise cancelling features, and we just don't want that.
You can stick some egg cartons.
Yeah, the egg cartons on the ceiling, and we're kind of going the opposite vibe. I mean, last week we had a guy turn up, just start drilling right outside the van.
I hope that he doesn't this week. He's not here right now, so it's looking good.
I did take it personally. That was the only hole he drilled in
one
like
hole,
2 hours,
and
it was right next to the van.
Well, he's clearly a listener.
Yes,
an
angry listener.
He just wanted to be part of it, I think. That's it.
He was obviously upset with something we'd said in a previous episode, venting his frustration.
Yeah. All right.
Nice.
So,
episode 6.
Yeah, this is it, number 6. Welcome to the good stuff. There you go.
This was our
this was the goal.
The goal when we started.
Get 6 out.
Mm-hmm. It's very good. It's been fun. I mean, it's kind of no different to our weekly coffee at the beach anyway, to be fair. Just kind of stand and deliver a bunch of rants.
Yeah, I was thinking about it earlier and I thought, well, maybe the difference is that we haven't, like, in some ways we're kind of going over older conversations that we had a while ago.
Yeah.
So we're recapping a bunch of stuff.
Hits.
And then that we've talked about, and we haven't really got on to just opining about whatever's new, which is obviously what we would do, usually down the beach.
Well, we might do a bit of that today, right? I mean, some of the kind of thematic questions, I guess, for today is like, not to rehash episode 1, of course, but like exploring in a bit more detail where all the value goes here. And then I guess like who the winners of this AI transition might be and who the losers of the AI transition might be.
Well, yeah, I was trying to think of a witty name.
Yes.
I don't know if I've got one. The best I could come up with is either like a Gloria Gaynor or just I Will Survive.
Yes.
That's Gaynor, isn't it?
Yeah, something that's
that's the one.
I think so, yeah.
I think that's the correct one.
Yeah.
So maybe we go with I Will Survive.
That's optimistic.
Title.
I like it.
And it was, last week we had an event that we put on where we gave people a run through of the whole value trap and where the value goes in AI and everything like that. It was basically standing up and talking for an hour and a half or so.
Did well.
A little bit full on, but what I thought was interesting is the comments from people afterwards were often about, but this bit won't be impacted and this will be fine and surely this industry will be okay. And I feel like there's a lot of maybe. It might be different. It might have a different time scale to different environments that we're looking at. But generally it was hard to rationalize why something would survive or not. But it felt like it came up so often. And then obviously we caught up with one of the guys yesterday and had a very, again, similar conversation again. Of but this bit will be okay, but you think this is okay, why isn't this going to be okay? And it's maybe this is a good area to just drill into would be, all right, well, what is likely to survive? What's not likely to survive? And how would we think about those things?
Yeah.
Moving forward. So
yeah, I think that's very nice framing. And I thought, do you know what? Maybe a slightly orthogonal place to start here would be in education, because I was actually going to ask you this on a personal level, because a bunch of people ask me this, but I don't have kids.
Yes, I did get educated. No, I don't think it was worth it.
Excellent. All right. Well, let's just end the pod there. We're good. That's episode 6. No, it's like, the question I get asked is like, okay, I kind of see where this is all playing out. What should my kids be studying? What kind of jobs will be around for them to take on when they finish school? Those are kind of like the navel-gazing questions a little bit. But I'm curious, like, how do you think about this for your kids? Obviously, Karis has the Teddy fashion business now, so, she's empire building. How do you think about this at home with the kids?
Yeah, it probably dovetails into a bit of a larger, maybe even like philosophical, like how do you approach these things, the kids sort of question. But I guess for me, I'm usually, about half a foot away from homeschooling on any given day.
Yeah.
In brutal honesty, like if it wasn't for the fact that school is such a good daycare, of like, it gives you space, and it's particularly like because we have no family over here in Australia as well, so like there's only so much time that we can reliably spend where we're not like there with the kids, that it's so useful for them to be in school to actually focus on stuff like other stuff and Beacon and these different things we're trying to build. So like it's hard to get space without that. But I think like I'm always like just this close to just go, fuck it, let's just pull them out of school and do homeschooling. And I'm not convinced that school will change at all rapidly enough for what they need. In the primary school they're actually fairly, it is quite an interesting school. Like there's a lot of like play-based learning, a lot of stuff like that when they were younger, which I thought was good. Like it's moved now into a little bit more standard school style. Like they are doing some interesting things around, like they're learning morphology, which is something I'd not heard of this before, but I think it's like the test school for the state, where they'll teach you all the Latin and Greek roots of all the words, so that you gain like a really good understanding of language and how it's constructed. And I have like just conversations around the dinner table with Mikey, and they'll start going, oh, that word you said is this because it means this, and it's like getting Google to break down what you're talking about, and I quite like that. So I'm fairly happy with where they're at school and the sort of stuff they get done. But yeah, in terms of like like what job do I want to educate them for? Well, none. I don't really want them to. I think jobs are a bit of a scam.
Yeah.
Like I think that's one of the things that sort of got us talking to each other in the first place, was like not really wanting to work a job anymore, and realizing that like there's just a different way to live. So more so it is like what I'm doing with Karis, and there's another one with Mikey. Me and Mikey are talking about building a so he's quite into his like tabletop games at the moment, so he likes his Warhammer and his miniatures and stuff. I used to be really into this as a kid as well. And I said like it would be cool. Like the thing that I really liked about that was all the story and the narrative. And there is a lot of like nice story and narrative around there, but like the games, I honestly can't keep up with the rules. Like I'm sure if I played it a bunch, I would be able to get it back in my head. Whereas when I was a kid, like it was more. I think it was more confusing, but I just had unlimited time, so I just spend all day on it. Whereas now I just like it feels difficult, and I was like, you know what, this is a good area for AI, and I think you could make a simple enough version of this game where we offload a lot of the complexity of how you deal with the rules, and like what the particular dice rolls are that you need and whatnot. And then you could like really go hard using AI on like the narrative and the storytelling and the world building and like battle reports and like news reports of what's going on. I was like, well, maybe we should have like there's some like alternative rule sets that you could get that are all like Creative Commons or like MIT license type things. So well, you take one of those, and we could build like a companion app for the thing where your entire army lives inside the AI thing. And then as you go through a battle in a game, you can just talk to the AI about what you're doing. It can tell you what you need to roll, but in doing that, it keeps track of everything that's going on. And then, like, you know, if you have a combat or something and somebody fights each other, then we can resolve that and say what the answer is, and then it can go into like a 2-minute, like, on the fly exposition of like what happened, and like maybe there's a breaking battle report, or something comes over the Vox com if it's the future one, or there's like, I don't know, like some sort of mystical spell wizard type voice comes on if it's a fantasy type.
Well, it's super immersive.
I reckon you could really like go ham on that. And I was like, you know what, like, what the kids have got is like just boundless imagination and time to think about these things. So that's his sort of current thing, is like, okay, here's several different game mechanics that we could use. Like, do we need to invent our own? Do we use one of these? Like, I'd be tempted to just pick up the, you know, there's such an installed player base that know the Warhammer stuff. It's like, you could make an app for this, but you just, Workshop just loves suing people, so I just don't think it's worth it. So it's like, maybe I just take like one of the open source game styles and just go with that.
Create something new.
And then the idea is every time you play the game, you just like add to this universe. And I was like, you know what, I could then back end that universe into Nostr, so it can be then shared amongst multiple different people. And you can have people in different places playing the games, and then they all build on each other's universes and all this. And I kind of like that idea.
Yeah, I love that.
So that's what. But like, what I want for them both is to realise a lot sooner than I did that work is a scam. And that like school is bit of a scam. Like, it's just like, just see what it is. Like, it's really like, you're going to get some education. I want you to get stuff you can out of it, but it's partly because right now, like, me and Mum need some time to get some work done, but I'm not against you guys dropping out when you want to.
Well, I think what's really interesting there is ultimately it's pure creativity, expression, and experimentation. And so I think there's like logically a couple of questions that dovetail out of the macro of like, well, what are kids going to do in the future? The kind of logical question is, what's the best way to learn? What should you be learning? We've kind of touched on this at times in the past, but I feel like we've known for a long time that in order to get the best student outcomes in schools, you kind of need to get as close as possible to one-to-one learning, which is basically just teacher or tutor, one teacher, one tutor to one student. That ratio is optimal, but also like just completely impractical, because we can't get that many teachers, we can't get that many students together in a one-to-one. Okay, so the next best outcome here is that AI helps us get closer to that one-to-one, where you actually maybe shift from like less of a classroom instructor and more to a mentor style guide that just helps oversees your learning journey with AI, which is more like self-directed. It follows your own like kind of creative output, and it's less syllabus based. You know, one of the things I used to have these conversations a lot, because we're obviously, you know, past business building an education technology company, and one of the kind of questions we always used to raise was this notion of like, what is the like actual value of education itself when the price of information goes to zero? And of course, like, the price of information has been trending towards zero since we've had the internet. But school hasn't really adapted that much. I think they would like to tell us that it has, but it hasn't really shifted from its like old world assembly line framework. And I can already imagine, like, if there were teachers listening to this, they'd probably get, you know, quite up in arms about that framing, but I do think that that's accurate.
I feel like the people I know that are more likely to homeschool were teachers. And that's like
that's true.
So that I don't think that's entirely true that they're that defensive over it. I think, unfortunately, they see a bunch of the problems, because usually, I mean, like, you know, Beth Ammon's a teacher as well, and, you know, one of her early observations was that, like, you just don't have enough time. Like, there's all this great theory and stuff that they would learn about how to differentiate and engage different students, but, you know, with what time?
Exactly.
You know, and there's like 40 of them in the class. Like,
they've all got different learning styles.
Even to like know who they are, if you've got multiple different classes, you know, like, you got 40 people in a class, you've got 5 different classes, you've got 200 kids. Well, you know, that's already pushed above your Dunbar number just in people that you know from school at that level, never mind the fact that you've got other people that you're aware of in your life. So clearly you're not going to have a close personal relationship with those people.
Well, it's, this is a relic of the assembly line, if you think about it. School is still formatted in roughly the same way as like the kind of average working day on an assembly line. It's 8 hours broken across 5 days, and you try to cram as much learning.
Not an intellectual assembly.
And that's the key, right? Like when we talk about the intelligent assembly line, we're rethinking how people work, and we're eliminating the time-based element of it. And I think similarly, education just doesn't need to be time-bound. It doesn't need to be constrained in 16 years of a person's life. Maybe it's more ad hoc. Maybe it should just be something that happens every day. Maybe you should just be constantly following your own intellectual curiosities and pursuits, and maybe that manifests in a bunch of different ways, like, for instance, building a tabletop game. And I think that's fine. I actually think that's the best thing, because like the bit I would add onto that, like that framing question that I put out earlier is like, the price of information has trended to zero. Now the price of intelligence is trending to zero. And so the real question is like, there's this form factor question. This goes back to, do we need a bigger truck? It's like, what's the right form factor for education? Right now it's one teacher that's in front of a classroom of kids, and there's a syllabus, and the teacher has to explain that syllabus. And then they move on to the next thing, regardless of whether the kids have got it or not. And some kids will get it straight away and some kids won't. And then this extrapolates out over, 12 years of schooling.
So we could probably do a similar sort of unpacking to what we did with the truck, right? Which is, I haven't really thought this through, so if this doesn't stand up, let's see how it goes. But, the truck was a particular size because you needed a human, right? So is there something similar playing in school classes, which is, at some point in the Industrial Revolution, we decided that we needed the kids to be taken care of so the parents could work, right? And then we put them into schools, and then we had an amount of children in a school that needed to be looked after. So somebody had to stand in front of all those kids and be the adult. So I guess that, like, okay, so now you've got the concept of a teacher. The teacher, there is a ratio question there of like, well, what's the correct ratio of students to teachers? Now that was even made based on, how well I can control people, or how well I can teach people, or potentially just like, what's the right number for, I don't know, fill in the factories or whatever. It's like every person that's there as a teacher isn't there doing the work inside the factory. So I assume there is some sort of local maxima here that's reached, that's a trade-off between, I need to be able to control them, I need to be able to teach them something, but I don't want to have so many people out of the workforce that it's an imposition. And that seems to have settled somewhere around, depending on the school, anywhere from like 10 to 40. Like it just, and I know the annoying thing that Bethany used to talk about was like, look, it should be, if it was 20, the experience here would be completely different. And we're just about to spend like X billion dollars in the UK rebuilding all the schools. Why are we building classrooms for 30 people? Like, shouldn't we just be reducing the size of these things? Like, why is this class this size? So I would guess that, like a smaller class amount. I don't know if it's necessarily that you would want everything, like necessarily like one teacher per person, but it is probably like you want the actual experience for the child to be very individual. Like there is something to be said about like teaching people in a group. As well, so there probably is like a group size that's perfect. I mean, it's highly likely the correct group size is 21. Because almost
like everything, right?
Like almost everything is better
number
at 21 than at a different number. But like somewhere between like probably 10 and 21 is the correct sort of size. It's just like it's not necessarily how the sizes are dictated anymore, because now you need to pay the teachers, and the teacher needs to account for the people, and it's all paid by the state, and they probably care more about like what's the way to keep the cost up, down, keep everybody in charge, but they're not necessarily incentivized on learning outcomes. So, obviously in a private school, you're more likely to see smaller classes than you are in a state school, for instance. So I think.
There's a set of benefits here. Like if you start at say like a tertiary level with universities, there's always been this question around like, well, how valuable is this? Like the information is the same. My access to the information is the same, especially with the internet. And so like the benefit tends to flow back to intangibles, which is, okay, if you go to an Ivy League college, you have the intangible value, the brand of going to the Ivy League, and that might open up better job opportunities for you, but you've also taken on, a shit ton of debt in order to do that. There's a network effect kind of benefit as well. You tend to be surrounded by a cohort of people that will also have similar types of opportunities as you, because you've gone to the institution with the intangible value, and you guys are all going to go and maximize that, and then you've got a network ready-made out of university. And then you can take this a step down into, high school and even primary school, and you can go, okay, well, some of the value here is not just how you learn, what you learn, it's also the kind of the nurture component, the socializing component as well, which you're obviously going to get much less of if you homeschool and things like that. So there are a bunch of other benefits there. I do wonder if there's like a shift back to more of a Aristotelian approach to learning. You got small groups with a master, and you just go off on these kind of walking exercises where you just engage in topics and you just discuss them and explore them, and they're kind of deep dives into how you think about something, more than here's a syllabus of information that I just need to get into your brain, and then we're going to move on to the next thing. I think that's more valuable, because you don't need to have every piece of information pass through your mind in school anymore, because the access to that information is just there. You need to know, okay, what is valuable for me to know in this moment? And then I can just go engage with the interfaces that help me produce all of the facts that I need, or all of the information that I need. But knowing how to make the most of that information, or interrogate a bit of information, think about something logically, I think becomes like really interesting. Of course, Aristotle was like a big proponent of the state, so maybe, I'm kind of less in agreement there, but I wonder if there's like a similar kind of approach. But then you've also got this like, this potential for like bifurcation in education standards as well, where this kind of gets seen as an elitist form of education, and it's not open to everybody, and there's all of those questions as well. But
I mean, I guess there's a hidden question in there, which is like, what gets seen as an elitist form? Like, what are we talking? So we haven't actually talked about like how that might change yet.
Yeah.
I do think that, so when just to put some personal experience on the table, when I think about homeschooling, I'm not thinking about me sitting in a chair saying, learn this. It is generally all going to be, if I go through it, it would be member of various clubs where we meet up and we go and climb trees and do shit in nature, and then plus just child-led education. And it would be like, I would generally just start a ton of businesses. I think that's probably the way I would frame the syllabus, so that we have some sort of output. We're trying stuff in a very real world market environment. You can sort of convince the kids that they actually do have some agency in the world that they can exercise, and help them understand what that means. And then you would just weave the lessons into that, because there's all there's all sorts of like ways you can use maths and ways you can use science and English, various things as you go, but it just makes so much more sense when you're trying to achieve something, or you're building on like something that you're legitimately interested in.
You also have boundless motivation, because you're building something that you want to build.
Exactly.
And all the lessons are wrapped into the actual doing. So the other aspect of this that we've not really touched on is like, you've got this problem in the corporate world where they view university grads as like blank slates, which is a huge problem. There's this divergence in like, expectations inside of a kind of a university environment, where they think they're preparing, or they're hoping they're preparing these students for the job market. And then when you get into the job market, those companies are like, well, we basically need to train you in everything that you need to know anyway. And so then there's this like rational question of, okay, well, what was the point of doing that if I could have just come in and been trained by you guys to do what you need me to do anyway? So there is that like that kind of like chasm in expected or anticipated value that just exists now. So this feels like it's just way more valuable for the actual student, because they're doing something that they're eminently motivated to do. all of the lessons are wrapped up in the doing. It's very practical, and there's something that's real and tangible on the other side of it. It's not theoretical.
So, I mean, 2 points, right? First is, I know we said that we were going to focus today on like what survives. But let's do that next week because this is more interesting.
I think
let's just go with it. Let's go with education and stuff.
Okay.
I think this is a good focus, right? And then my next point I was just going to make was, I actually think that like there's a good example of like we've both actually learned to code recently.
Wow.
Like, well, okay, well you're still
it's a work in progress.
But maybe you're still more in the vibe coding sort of experience at the moment.
Put it this way, none of the things that I can do now, I could even consider 3 months ago.
Okay, yeah, there you go. There's a new skill, right?
There is a skill emerging, yeah.
But then, and like one of the, the drive, like what's made that possible is like, yes, it's the tools and the support of like having AI that could patiently just sit there and work you through something and just build that momentum.
Yeah.
And then the other bit of that is that, you needed something to focus on that you wanted to do. Like, it's really hard to learn to code if there's nothing you want to code because it's too abstract. It just means nothing. Whereas if you have a thing that you want to build and you can actually achieve it and you see progress towards it, it's massively motivating. And it's such a difference. And like, to me, that was the role that AI played, was just, I've gone through this loop so many times of attempting to learn to code and just not getting myself over the line because everything's just too abstract. And then when I try and apply it, it doesn't quite work in the situation that I'm doing. And I'll just hit a bug and it might take me a week to resolve it. And it's like, it's not worth it. Like, I'm just bad at this, blah, blah, I'll never get better. And then like, I moved into a world where I could just ask very specific questions to this very patient teacher.
Yeah.
And the main difference that it had on my ability to learn wasn't that like I was better at now understanding the answers. It was that I just had like just momentum.
Yes.
It was like a steam train. It was like every, yes, I would have to sit down and do, like it still requires like a couple of hours of just focus to do stuff. Like even, because if you let the tool do the work, you just don't learn anything. Like that's good for prototyping, but that all needs to be thrown away.
Yeah.
Like we talked about a minute ago.
Yeah.
But being able to just steadily build momentum on something that you want to build and getting better and better and better and learning and having somebody that's always there to explain something to you in the moment is just huge.
Yeah.
And I don't see how this isn't going to be like the biggest thing to hit education.
Well, I hope so. Like we were chatting about this earlier offline, but one thing that I've found, that I've discovered, is tracking GitHub commits is just the most gratifying thing ever. And I'm just stunned by that. But it makes so much sense, right? Because I'm effectively gamifying my own progress and development. And then when there are a few days that pass where I just haven't made any commits, I'm like, but I need to do that. I need to jump back in and I need to just make sure I'm getting that progress. And it's like this visual reminder of my own like learning journey there. And I think that's really powerful if you then just combine these kind of like game dynamics into your own learning and progress. Because that's the other thing. It's like, it's all quite abstract in a classroom environment. It's like you go through a term at school, you learn a bunch of shit, and then you get to the end of the term and then you've done a bunch of tests and you get a grade. And that's it until the following term. Maybe it's changed a little bit. It's been a long time since I've been in school. But that's essentially it, right? And I just think, like, if you've got this real world projects that you're working on, and you've got a way to kind of gamify your own progress, and you already feel eminently motivated by the doing anyway, but then there's just something that keeps drawing you back in. I was saying to you earlier, like, I can kind of feel the dopamine when I get that green box checked off in the tracker, and I'm like, oh wow, that's cool. I feel like I've made progress today. And I think there is something here with like video game dynamics as well. Like these things are hugely addictive. I think when done right, they can be like, good tools for learning, but I think mostly it's a waste of time.
I mean, it's pretty worth just to put a pin on that, would to say that like, a video game is just a form of game. And I think humans just like games.
Yeah.
It's sort of like all learning that we do as kids is through play. Like there's an interesting, I think, observation that somebody made around large language models where they would say, look, it's really interesting that like we need 7 billion parameters to teach a language model how to talk to you. But like a child, in like the number of parameters a child can observe over time to learn to talk within like a year to a year and a half is way less than that. Like it's like an order of magnitude less. It'd be in the hundreds of millions. It's like, how do they do it?
Yeah.
Like, how is it that they manage to learn to talk with less input than this computer program, which is also a neural network, and they're both establishing similar sort of things, right? Like, what is it about the kid that allows them to learn quicker than what we know? And there's something there that we just don't know yet. And at some point we might learn it, and we'll have better language models, right? Like, but it's
interesting.
It's kind of interesting, but like I know like one of the things with kids is they just learn everything through playing. Like it's just So you need to be able to play with stuff, and the beauty of play is it doesn't feel like work. Right? It feels like play. So
well, it's kind of funny as well because I think as we become adults as well, I think there's this like unspoken truth that we kind of tap into where we're like, I want to find that like childlike creativity again in my life. And
well, fuck yeah, like
that's
that's
the thing, right? We spend most of our adult lives trying to like hone in, track back to that state. I think you're right. I think there's something really powerful about being able to learn through play and not losing it at an arbitrary point in your life. Because that's kind of what happens. You finish school and you're thrust into this like, well, to be honest, it happens way before you finish school, I think, to be fair.
Yeah.
You're just thrown into this like arbitrary production line where you're just like trying to generate a bunch of credentials that then, act as a key that you place into a lock to get a job that puts you on a track, and that track then unlocks a bunch of like side quests, like, finding a partner and getting a house and getting on the property ladder, all those kind of things. It's all very well defined and structured. But you lose that state of play that you had as a child, that like endless curiosity. That's really sad.
Can I make Bryn, who he will often say that he's like a magnet for people's midlife crises. And obviously I went to him with my midlife crisis, and I was like, it all feels a bit sort of slavey. Like I don't know what's going on. Like, but he works with a group called Wisdom in Your Life, and they do a lot of like, I don't know what you describe it. They do a lot of workshops and various things around how to express and like move through emotion and get in touch with like, like your purpose and all this sort of stuff. Not like in the, I don't know, live your dreams sort of thing, but it more or less comes down to like reinvigorating that idea of play and art and expression, and like just working with emotions and like thinking through like how you feel about stuff and like expressing everything out of you instead of bottling it up and ignoring it. And like they do like a workshop around like purpose and place and things, and it really is kind of like, oh, you remember when you were a kid? And it's like, do that. And it's like, shit, I'm happy when I do stuff like that. It gives me energy again. Like I need to do more stuff that gives me energy instead of saps it. And
completely.
Like there's certain times with work that I know there's a lot of stuff I could do that I just feel like I just can't do anymore because I just don't necessarily have the energy for it. It's like, this is gonna just drain me.
Certain things you find energize you, and certain things are just a total battery drain. And you notice it more and more as you get a bit older. I think like you have like this tolerance for it when you're younger. Like in your 20s, you just like, I don't enjoy this thing, but I'm just going to do it anyway, and I'll smash it out and no worries. And then as you kind of get mid-30s, I've found the same. It's just like I have less and less tolerance for the stuff that drains me. I don't want to be doing those things. I just want to maximize all of my intent around the things that fill me with energy. But the key word, I think, which I don't want to like just speed past, because I think this is going to be like maybe dovetails what our original topic for today was.
No, we've moved on.
But it's like purpose, right? I think this is like, and I think this is the other question here, is AI is almost going to force us to rediscover this to some degree, because for a lot of people, purpose and value and status, they're all wrapped up in their job. And so
it's a proxy.
Yes.
It becomes.
And I think this is the thing, forced or otherwise, we need to rediscover what our purpose is going to be. And I think this is where the midlife crisis comes from as well, right? It's like, how closely am I living in alignment with my purpose? What do I want out of, like, enough time has passed out of your existence where you try to take stock of like how you want to use the time you have remaining. And I think that's also like a bit of a trigger for some of this stuff. And it's like, some of it is, I'm just living like completely unaligned with my purpose. I don't know necessarily what that purpose is. I just feel out of alignment. And so there is this like forced process of discovery that emerges as well. But I do think this might be a byproduct of all of the AI, things that we're going to explore today. What happens to, like, as you commoditize expertise, like, what happens to...
So does AI give you purpose, or will it make you find purpose, or will it just destroy everything else and you just have to go and figure out what to do?
This is now a question of agency, right? It's like, if you exhibit high agency, you probably have pretty good alignment with purpose. Not always, but I'd say like you're more likely to, because you'll be constantly thinking about that and acting out in alignment with it. I think if you pretty low agency, you're always looking to some other institution for guardrails.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it necessarily follows though that if you could live in low, it's not necessarily bad.
No,
like,
I'm not suggesting
just
it's a bad thing.
The way it is, and then you don't necessarily care that much about what it is you're doing. You could be perfectly happy. Fuck, sometimes I'm jealous of people that just seem quite happy to whatever, but yeah. I mean, I don't necessarily think it's a flow on that I don't think it's necessarily a gift of AI that you're now gonna like find purpose. Like, I think it would probably be more like,
well, I don't know that you find it.
No,
I think it just forces a pursuit.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say.
That's like, they're completely different things.
I think it's likely to be dislocating enough to everyday life that it makes you reconsider stuff. I do think one of the great things that it does do is that it does allow you to learn new things, which is when you decide that, like, oh shit, like I've accidentally spent 30 years of my life doing X, whereas when I was a kid I really wanted to do Y, but is it too late? And then you go, no, you can, like, you might not be the best in the world or something, but you could be much better than you are now, and you've got a way of learning how to do that, and as long as you've got agency and a goal, and you know what you want to do, then we have tools here that will help you and can help give you that momentum. I think that's a great thing. I don't know if I've seen, like, beyond like just like, I don't know, talking to these models and like asking questions as you go. I don't think I've seen a good like education product.
No.
Like, I feel like we talked about this a little bit for other reasons, right? But like, I feel like one of the things that's missing in a lot of stuff is that a lot of AI interactions tend to be very call and response. Of like, I ask something, I get an answer. I ask something, I get an answer, and it's me driving the thing. And what I don't see a lot of is, I don't know, like opinionated AIs that say, like, oh no, we're going to talk about this, Pete. I'm like, oh, all right, are we? Like, this is what we're going to do. I feel like that's almost what you do need a little bit of that. Like, like a coach that you have, or a teacher or somebody. A teacher doesn't just stand necessarily at the front of the class and just go, you got anything on your mind? Like they've usually got an idea of where they want to go. And maybe even in, like, let's say all education became like a child-led education thing. Like, would you have just a teacher stood at the front of the class just waiting to ask questions? Well, maybe they'd wait for the prompt to see, like, okay, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to observe and see what you're interested in. But then when you get interested in something, now I'm opinionated, and I want to like drive the conversation this way. So like, you're talking, like I said earlier, like, you have the kids would be starting a business of some sort, and I'd be like, right, there's a maths lesson there. And it's almost like you want that, like, again, I haven't seen this as a product anywhere. It would be like, okay, well, where's the opinionated AI that's like paying attention to the fact that you're doing this? And it's like, Pete, you keep asking about this stuff and this coding. So instead of just building it for you, I'm just going to tell you, because you've told me, you've programmed me as your agent to go, like, don't just write the code for me. Teach me how you're doing this thing. And like, to me, those opinionated agents don't exist yet. I say yet. I'm close.
Yeah.
Some of my own, but
yeah, and that kind of mirrors how I'm using AI to help me to code. Right. There is obviously like a vibe coding component to what's going on because I'm not writing the code necessarily, but what I will do is be like, I'll slow down the process. Like I'll use Cursor for the actual code component of it, but then I'll have, Claude open, and I will filter through questions, or I will, take part of the code, pop it into Claude and just be like, look, just walk me through what's going on here for my own benefit. And I will prompt it up front and just say, like I'll create a project in Claude and basically go like, the goal here is to, teach me, at a high level what's happening in this code, but then also like explain to me what's happening at a higher level in the code, but then also try and turn this into like a learning experience for me so I can actually be engaged in this. I can get to a point where I can read and review the code and have an idea of what's going on. So in that sense, it's not strictly vibe coding, but I also have a different intention. Like a lot of people are kind of trying to stand up a product as quickly as possible. And to my mind, I haven't seen anything really yet.
Just side note, you should definitely not release a product that you vibe coded.
Yeah, well, that's
for anybody else to use. That's kind of
that's
rude.
I was just going to say I haven't seen anything yet that has like replaced a kind of incumbent business, right? And I think that tells you everything you need to know about it. So, whereas my approach is very intentional. Like I am learning it. I am using it to learn, but so it's scratching an intellectual itch that I've had for, a decade or more. And not necessarily to get to the end state of launching something. That's, completely immaterial. Like a couple of things I've just got running locally and it's kind of cool. It's good enough. And that's fine. So yeah, to that extent, it is entirely self-directed where I'm scratching my own itches, but I'm learning way more than I have been able to in the past, trying to learn coding in the abstract. And yeah, I wonder, where this could be extrapolated out to, what fields, what disciplines, what's important even. There's this meta question around like, what do we need to know? What's important? What's not important anymore? All of these kinds of questions, which was kind of the lead into this conversation, like you've got kids, what do they ought to know when they finish like an arbitrary period of schooling? Or is the period of schooling so arbitrary that we just don't need it?
I mean, I've definitely got like a bias that way, right? Like, I mean, I say that as somebody that's not homeschooling kids, so take that as read. Like when I think about like, would I replace, say, school with AI agents or just like a subscription? Like here's ChatGPT Pro, fill your boots. There you go. Like maybe. I think there's definitely something to consider, which is there's a Robin Hanson book called The Elephant in the Brain. If you read it, it's like it's pretty old now. It must be like 8 years old or so. But he talks about how most stuff isn't about the stuff, which is that like he'll talk about like end of life care, and he'll be like we spend like obscene amounts of money on like end of life care for people that we know just don't like even know, like we'll pay like huge medical bills to keep somebody alive that's effectively dead, and you're kind of prolonging them in a worse state than they might ever want to be, but you do it because it's good to be seen to be doing it amongst everybody else, and it shows that you care because you did it, even though it's not necessarily about the caring. Or he talks about school, and he said like school is daycare. It's like it's some of these like slightly uncomfortable things that you would look at and go like, yeah, it is. It's actually something different. It's not what we're saying it is that's going on here. And so it could be that like, does it change school? Well, no, because school's just daycare. Or like, yes, but kids go to school and they just get better access to computers and stuff like that. I mean, there's a guy, Aaron Levy, who's the CEO of Box, who actually has had a lot of like quite good takes on AI recently, I've found. But I know he'd mentioned, like he brought up there's a school in Texas that's like added like AI tutoring to all the kids, and it's just suddenly become like one of the top schools in the country. He said like his kids go there, and he said like it's been like a massive win for them, and you're like, yeah, like, and it's the interesting thing is that really is just affordable. across the board. Like, to give every kid like a subscription to even like top of the range models or multiple of them would be quite cheap.
Yeah, of course it would.
And particularly if you then rolled it all up under like a school program to enough people, like you could definitely do that. And that's not even with any sophisticated tooling for it, like the stuff that you could do with like, like a proper analysis of like what you've learned and
well, the other element
repetition tools
is contextual learning, I think, as well, which if we consider that every student learns a little bit differently, they've all got their own styles, but they also have their own interests. If you take something like history, most people find it pretty dry. I quite enjoy history, but I know most people tend to find the way it's written and communicated and delivered fairly dry and a bit boring, but also a bit abstract, right? History generally isn't, as a subject, delivered in an applied way, as in, like you might get an applied science, which is like, how does this theory actually play out in a more practical way? History, we don't look back on history and go, well, this is how it might rhyme in the future. But we could, and maybe we should. But also from a contextual standpoint, it's depending on how young you want to go. Maybe, you've got a favorite superhero, and really what would be interesting is if your superhero delivered lessons about something that happened in history, like the Napoleonic War, but did so in a way that you found way more engaging because now you're talking to Captain America. And maybe that is right for Tommy, because Tommy is a massive Captain America fan. And now all of a sudden you've got this motivation, but also excitement and interest in a learning area that maybe he didn't previously have, just because he's able to engage in this subject with Captain America.
Yeah.
And I think that is going to be a huge unlock as well, because, one of the other detractors for homeschooling that you often hear from, conventional educators is that the students just don't have the motivation on their own to go and self-direct their own learning. And I think this is, maybe there is some truth to that if they have to stick to the kind of the core syllabus that is defined by the school, but go and do it on their own. Because now there's a bunch of things that they need to go and learn that maybe they have an interest in, 10% of.
Yeah.
And I think that is the problem. It's like what we're trying to do is we're trying to funnel kids through this framework that we built for the school system, this assembly line, but we're saying like, you're just going to do that at home. And I don't think that's what homeschooling should be, which is kind of what you're describing.
Yeah. It's like it's Margot Robbie in the bathtub, right?
Yeah.
Like it's like there's credit default swaps,
Yep.
and then there's Margot Robbie in a bubble bath drinking champagne explaining credit default swaps.
Such a good
And
name.
the two things are not the same.
Yep.
Like one of them is easier to grasp for some reason.
Absolutely.
And slightly more engaging. But there's a lot of effort that goes into creating Margot Robbie in a bathtub, explaining credit default swaps into you, from the script writing to making it simple to, the visuals.
Yeah.
All of that could actually be created on the fly with AI.
Absolutely.
For whatever context is best for you.
Exactly. I mean, I would argue that context is best for everybody. But, I mean, as someone that studied finance, I must admit, like that, for me, when I first watched The Big Short, for anyone who's not getting the reference, great scene in The Big Short.
I couldn't remember if it was that or Margin Call.
No, it's Big Short. Yeah,
Right, yeah.
Margin Call, also a great movie.
Yeah.
But I remember when I watched that the first time in The Big Short, I was just like, oh yeah, I get it. This makes sense. And I'm
Why wasn't my professor this engaging? Like, what's different here? Like, it must be the script writing.
Obviously, yeah. There's a bunch of things different there, but yeah, there's something very interesting about contextualized learning, I think, and when you can then send kids off on their own learning pathways and learning journeys with AI. Yeah, and the problem we've got obviously with existing models is there's the memory problem as well, and one of the things that we've looked at obviously in the past, I guess as an academic question, is the use of knowledge graphs as a way to kind of capture everything you've learned, to be able to use that as a bit of a map, as a bit of a Google map to navigate your way through different learning pathways as well, to be able to trace back to stuff that you've learned in the past. Which I think is really, really interesting as well.
Again, there's a lot of tooling there, right? Because it's not that it's not to say that what you have here is like you just add LLM and job done.
Yeah.
It's to say something like, right, well, what you can do with LLMs is you can start to break down syllabuses and courses into topics and abstractions and like different things that you need to know. And so you could take existing courses that we know work and we could break them down and understand, well, what are all the things, what are all the concepts, what are all the adjectives, like what are all the things that somebody learns alongside this? And we can use the LLMs to interpret those courses, to pull all that information out. And then once we've got that information out, we can then build that into something like a knowledge graph that then allows us to explain all the related concepts that are in a set of lessons or a syllabus or multiple syllabuses that we would do. And then we can just put that over aside here and we say, like, this is like the best in class version of how you learn this topic. And that's like a map, right? And then we can move over here and we can say, right, well, what do you know, Andy? And like, you know, we can ask you a bunch, again, we can use LLMs to ask you questions and then you can answer and then we can interpret from those answers like, okay, well, what does he know? And we can like run, you know, existing stuff like space repetition testing and various different things to understand like, well, what level of proficiency have you got?
Yes.
And we can build your version of a knowledge graph, right? And then we have two knowledge graphs that can represent like what it's almost like one is like the end state of where you want to be and one is where you are right now. And then we can sort of say like, if we need to make Andy's graph look like this, you know, like what for the nodes that he's in, like what are the next best connections that we could make for Andy here? You know, like, is it that, you know, does he need a bit more bubble bath before he needs the credit default swaps? Who knows? You know, like, I don't know, like what the...
More margarita.
Yeah, but there's like something here. Like, we don't go straight to, like, you know, this is... Like, I'm trying to think about how to describe what I'm doing with my hands here for the podcast, but like, let's say there's somewhere over here in the top right, which you're completely empty at, but you've got a very well filled in bottom left, right? Well, we're not going to go and pick a subject from the top right on the graph.
Yes.
We're going to go, right, well, he's in the bottom left over here. Let's start branching out. And let's find a way up there. If that's the thing that he's interested in, there's like 12 different concepts he needs to understand along the way, and we can see that inside the graph and the way the nodes connect.
Yes.
So let's start branching him from a node that he already has. So he's good down here, so let's branch him up from there. Okay, now he's good here. Let's bring him along on that journey, and all of a sudden you've got like a fully personalized like learning map for an individual.
That's the Google Map analogy, isn't it? It's like you type in the destination, you don't just teleport there, right? You need the map to show you a logical path for you to navigate your way to the end point.
Exactly.
And this is the kind of the abstraction and learning at the moment is you're given the end point and then there are a bunch of places that you'll visit along the way and they're not necessarily well mapped out for you, and you might miss a day because you're sick and you miss school, and then you know you've just missed out a critical junction that you needed to pass through. And and I think if you've got that mapped out, you can also spot where the deficiencies are. You know, how it's not just about like what do I need to know. It's also about, you know, how well do I understand, you know, each of the steps along the path as well before I get to that destination. I think that's the really fascinating part as well. And the thing is, right, like even if you don't have necessarily one tool that like scaffolds all of this stuff, like one of the things that I've been doing a lot is using language model and taking something that's quite complex that I've read. Even if I somewhat understand it, I might just copy paste that into the language model and go, okay, explain this to me like I'm 5, which is something that a lot of people talk about and do, right? And then I'll get the explanation. I'm like, okay, now what I'm going to do right away is I'm going to try and build on this. And then I'll ask the language model to explain it to me like I am a, you know, high schooler. And then you can see the kind of the more granular detail gets baked in. There's a logical step. I'm like, okay, cool, I understand that. Now explain it to me like I'm an undergrad, and it goes another step. And now I'm just layering information, but you can see how there's like a progression here in knowledge density that you're building up in each stage. And then finally, if I really want to, I might go, great, now explain this to me like I'm, you know, a postgrad student. And so now I've walked through all of the kind of conventional stages of learning, just applied to one very small piece of information. And the key thing for me then is like, can I explain that back to the language model? And can I do it in a way that's simple, that doesn't rely on like jargon, that demonstrates that I actually have some clear mastery over this subject. And the thing is, I think you can get there much faster now by going through that exercise. And what's really interesting that I've found is you kind of need to leave your ego out the door when you start doing that. Because there is something quite liberating about taking something you think you understand but don't quite understand, popping it into a language model and going, okay, explain it to me like I'm 5, because it will. And then you have to read that and you sit there and go, okay, well, I'm clearly not 5. This is really basic. But then you realize how important that step is in the process. It's like you can't actually just fly past that and go straight to postgrad level, because you're not going to have the same degree of like foundational understanding as you might have.
I mean, another technique I've used is very similar to that. Would be to like use it to test my analogies of like how I think I understand it. So I would do this a bunch with. So I run like a Bitcoin Socratic seminar where like every month it's like something will happen. And we have a bunch of topics, and like throughout the month you add the topics to the list, and then the day comes around and you've got to go and talk about them. And I'll go like, oh crap, like I added like something like, so I had one where I can think of would be like functional encryption. And I remember like seeing it and going, God, that looks interesting. I have no idea what's going on there. I'll add it to the list and then I'll look at it. And like, I didn't look at it.
Yeah.
and then it came around and I was on my way over to the bit devs and like walking down and I was like, shit, I don't know how I'm going to explain this. I think I grabbed like a couple of articles about it and chucked it into ChatGPT as I was walking down, and then just like started to talk to it about the article. And I did the same sort of thing. Like, can you explain it to me? Like, I usually say like I'm a 10-year-old that's reasonably technical, but I'm good at the logic but not good at the detail, or something like that. I try and describe roughly who I am a little bit as well. Sometimes I'll go a bit younger. And then I'll get like it to explain it to me, and then I'll start explaining back my understanding of it to say, look, would a sensible analogy be something like this? And then what's wrong with that analogy and how would you build on it? And then we sort of like co-create a better analogy to explain the thing that we're doing. And you actually come out with like because you've engaged in that creation of the thing as well, like it really does fit better in your head. I mean, that said, I can't, if you ask me right now what exactly is functional encryption, I'd say, you know what, I've kind of forgot about
But that's okay, because with the right prompting, you probably would be able to recall it.
I can get it back.
And that's the key. Like what you've described is like purely efficient tuition. A tutor that has all the information, but also can walk you through these learning stages so that you can gain mastery. But the other aspect that it has is infinite amounts of patience. You know, which is the other thing. It's like we often we kind of excuse the human component of this as well. It's like, you know, teachers get tired, they have bad days, they have good days, you know, they get
I'll
sick.
admit, I don't have an infinite amount of patience.
I don't have it, no. That's it.
I'd love to.
But also, from a learning perspective, you know, I mentioned one aspect is you leave ego at the door, but the other is like, there's no fear of judgment. You know, I think this is like certainly a thing that holds kids back in learning environments is this fear of asking the question. Like, I don't understand something. They don't want to necessarily be seen amongst their peers to not understand it, and so then they won't ask the question, and then that compounds the kind of the competency gap over time.
Yeah, the social structure of the learning environment that's definitely. There's an interesting thing here, point that again reminds me of like where I thought we were going to go initially with this one, which would be, I think there's a lot of areas where we would look at them and go like, oh well, you can't. Yeah, that's going to be fine because I can ask ChatGPT that now and it can't instantly replace me or give me the correct answer straight away, and therefore that industry is safe.
Yes.
And I would say, no, it's just a tooling question. And I think what was interesting about that little discussion there is that like, I think the answer to almost all of these when we get into it is that there's a set of tooling that you're going to need to do this. And so for instance, like is ChatGPT the best educator in all of these different subjects? No, because when you ask it a question straight off the bat, like all it's going to do is be able to recall something from like what it understands inside its model. And what it understands inside its model, like it can look like magic, but for the most part, you shouldn't necessarily trust it as like a fact recall system.
Yeah.
And facts are important in education. So we probably need a better way of dealing with facts and memory and various things. This is like what we talked about with the graphs, is like that's a great way of then extracting the facts. So instead of just answering from the model, you want to answer by inquiring against a better knowledge base from which you can pull out.
Yes.
I mean, the other way it does it is that it will pull stuff from the internet again. Like your first Google search is not necessarily always the best way to understand these things. So there is tooling that needs to be created there. And like doing like what we talked about, saying like, okay, well, let's take all the educational material and then process it into a format that is now usable for LLMs inside a graph. Like that's a great way of going about something like that. But it's a tooling question. It's not a, do we need better models? It's not a Billy Big models sort of thing. It's not a, you know, there's something missing that hasn't been invented yet. It's just like, yeah, somebody needs to run the tooling that takes various lessons, decomposes it into subjects, and then builds an appropriate graph that can then be interrogated by an LLM, and all of a sudden these things will get amazing at teaching you about stuff. And the next one is the tooling around like, okay, well, how do we know where you are?
Yes.
You know, there's a set of tooling there, right? You need your own personal graph. You need to be able to do it. Ideally, you want that self-hosted because, you know, we're not evil Sam Altmans that want to scan your eyeballs. But, you know, so you want that to be local. You need to be able to test yourself on how to do it. You need to be able to track all that progress over time. You need to be able to run a delta between like a public graph and your graph and understand the difference. Like this is all, it's hard. There's a bunch of hard tooling that needs to be created there. But if you create that tooling, you'll have a great educational experience. It's unlocked by LLMs in the same way that a lot of stuff is unlocked by LLMs, because all of a sudden it allows us to bridge between like computer world of graph database and structure and language and human language and your ability to interpret stuff. And then to reframe facts into different spaces. So I think it's going to be massive. Like I think education is going to change quite drastically.
I think the other interesting aspect of the graph as well is it's very much a choose your own adventure to some degree. But the big question we haven't discussed here is like what happens to credentialism, because if you think about it, like our whole education system is built around credentialism, right? And this is the kind of the key into the lock analogy I gave earlier. It's like the bit of paper suggests that you can do a thing, and then depending on where you got the paper from dictates like what kind of opportunity is open to you. And I think this is where the graph becomes really interesting, because it's like you're pulling back the curtains on this. It's like, what do you actually understand? Not to suggest that this should be outward looking or something that you can share with other people, but it's really important for you. So what do I actually understand? What am I actually interested in? I don't need the piece of paper that credentials me to say that I've learned a particular thing.
Yeah.
I know I have. I know what I know. I know what I'm good at. I know what I'm interested in. I think that is going to be really, really important. And, you know, this is something that I felt as well. Like one of the reasons I went and studied law and finance is because I didn't know what I wanted to study. And so it felt like more of an insurance policy, because I just thought, do you know what? Maybe one day in the not too distant future, I will figure out exactly what I want to do. And then I'll have these degrees that will open, you know, a decent number of doors, and I'm relatively good at these things. So this feels like a good enough kind of fit. But some of that emanates from just not knowing what you know, are really interested in.
Yeah.
You know, I really loved history at school. I mean, I still really love history. But I could never translate that into, like, what will I do with that practically? But that wasn't important. That wasn't the animus, right? It's like when we were in school, the animus was always, what information do you need to know to help you get to the next level of information that then gets you a job in a particular discipline? Whereas if it was just learning for interest's sake, I would have kept going down like a history track.
Makes sense.
Right, it does.
Yeah.
But then it's also about like, but what other things, you know, inevitably I discovered that I really just love building things. It's got nothing to do with history, really. I mean, but there is a history component to this, because you learn about businesses that have been built in the past and what kind of influence that had on society, and what the founders were like, and why they came to the decisions that they came to, and who did they hang around with. And, you know, history doesn't just necessarily mean there was this guy named Napoleon, he went and conquered, you know, all of Europe.
Did he?
Can literally, spoilers.
You're going to put that up front. You can't.
I've just ruined it for a bunch of kids. Sorry.
What if they've not seen Sharp?
This is why, a classic show, this is why Sean Bean
Yes.
This is why
Surprisingly,
so
with
good.
a Sheffield accent, which is rare.
There you go.
Rare for sure.
Wow. No spoilers there. Go check out Sharp. We might edit this
Also
out.
available in books.
Is it?
Yeah, you never
It's
read the
based
books.
on books.
They're actually quite good. Yeah,
I didn't realise that.
Bernard Cornwell.
Oh, of course it is. Yeah, of course it is. God,
Also, if you're going to read books, read Flashman, the series. Like, it's amazing.
Yeah.
It's so funny. It's highly inappropriate. So, anyway, that's enough for book corner.
But yeah, I can't remember where I was going with that. But yeah, probably nowhere interesting. But you know, like, I guess the kind of the key thing is, like, I was talking about credentialism, but I think the other thing that dovetails off that is this notion that we will have this commoditization of expertise, and maybe this is a subject we should say for next week, but if we're going to touch on it briefly, it's that, like, school does serve as this, like, pathway toward building up enough of a skill base that helps you on a track toward a particular credential that says, yes, you know how to do this thing because you've done it for decades. And maybe that thing is, now you're a lawyer, now you're a doctor, maybe now you're an engineer, or you're a consultant, or an accountant, you know. And I think the problem is, like, when you basically have, like, AI that just can ingest the collective expertise of, like, you know, entire professions. You have millions of documents and cases and examples of this stuff, and then is able to deploy that expertise at scale, at negligible marginal cost. Like, well, at that point, what happens to the kind of specialized knowledge, and what is the value of that credential? And I think this is the kind of the functional question that leads to, like, what is the value of education? Why are we doing this thing?
I mean, I'm probably quite anti-credentialism in general.
Yep.
Mainly, yeah, like, I don't like it. I don't think it sort of helps in any sort of way. Like, it's interesting that moving from the UK to Australia, like, one of the things that was immediately obvious to me is that this is a more meritocratic society than the UK, and that there's, like, a particular set of jobs, say in the Foreign Office, where you had to have gone to the certain school,
been to Eton.
Well, it's usually you would have come out of Oxford and your name was Rupert, sort of thing, right?
Yeah.
You know, like, and like, then you can work in the Foreign Office or the Treasury or whatnot. There's certain schools that you could have gone to for all of these things, and there's a more deeply ingrained class system that wasn't obvious to me growing up as, like, the son of a mine. It became way more obvious to me, like, when I got to university, and I was like, oh, some of you people are posh. Like, I didn't realise this was a thing. And then I came to Australia, and immediately I was like, oh, right, I can just sort of do whatever I want to a certain extent. And then you realise that there's a slightly different thing, like an overlay here, which is that you might not like this one, but like, everyone went to the same school.
Yes,
like you did. You went to the same school as everybody, which is useful, right?
People still talk about it even at my age. Like, what school did you go to?
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
It is a topic of conversation.
And so there is a thing here. It's less of a thing here than it is in the UK. In the UK, like, there is a strict class system in a way. It's just hidden. Like, here it's not as obvious. It's just, like, a little bit of a, like, oh, cool, like, I know you went. I mean, we did this thing on Thursday night, and the amount of times I heard, like, oh, you guys know each other. Yeah, we went to the same school. Like, we're mates because you know somebody who went to my school. And we're all, it's like, fuck, you're all the same.
Yes.
This is interesting. There's a definite milieu, but Perth's a small place as well, so that is going to play out to a certain extent. I actually think it's even more, like, off the hook in the US, where it's a lot more meritocratic again, where you literally can just turn up and do whatever you want. I'm generally in favour of, like, you should just be able to do whatever
100%.
you want. Just if you can do the thing, do the thing. If you can't do the thing, then that's okay. Like, you don't have to, but, like, do something else. Like, just
it's the meme, right? You can just do things, but
you can
apply it
just
to
do
education. You can just learn.
Yeah. But I like the idea that the credentialism, I think the arc is that there's less credentialism over time, in the same way that I think there's less, like, enforced class systems over time, which I think is good. Like, I think it should be based on merit and ability more than anything else. I'm okay with that. I'm okay with my kids growing up in a meritocratic society and then competing. Yeah, I think it's gonna be hard when you're competing against robots, but
that's true.
Fuck it. Like, you can.
But there's always this notion of like show, don't tell, which is something that we've obviously talked a lot about for how we want to build other stuff. And, you know, it's almost like it doesn't matter what we say to differentiate ourselves in a market. It's more about what we build and how we prove out the values we want to operate by. You know, what we say is completely pointless. Like everyone says some subset of the same thing. It's like what you actually do that matters. And so,
well, I mean, this was some of the animus behind the podcast, right? Which is that it's very easy to be full of shit, but convincing over a 3-minute video. It's quite hard to be full of shit and remain convincing over sort of 10 hours of like off the cuff audio. So I'm kind of hoping that this, you know, that's like one of the things I'd like people to realise from this. Is that, like, yes, this is something that I've thought long and hard about.
Definitely, yeah. I think the other big unlock here is, you know, for us, this is obviously really important, but being permissionless is, if you think about education, it is inherently permission-based, right? Because you've got a strict syllabus, you've got a teacher that essentially handholds you through every step in the process. You can't really deviate from that syllabus much at all. Obviously, you can go and do your own reading and stuff like that at home, but when you're on the clock in school, you're very much on a path, on a track. And you don't get a whole lot of leeway to deviate from it. And you kind of do see it a little bit where kids are more musically oriented or more creative, and maybe there are like better schools for them to go to hone in on those disciplines, and you know, but it's still very permissioned. And you know, I think the big thing with the way work's changing as well is this whole notion of you can just build shit, you can just do things. This is very much a motto of the permissionless. You can just learn. You can just find a track.
You know what? You can just learn things is a good podcast title.
It's probably the podcast. I'm glad we got there.
I was wondering.
What are we going to do here?
Yeah.
You can just learn things.
You can just learn things. Like, that is a magic skill of these things. Like if we get nothing else out of like LLMs, like the ability to just help you learn things. And like all the tooling stuff that I'm talking about as well, like there's kind of like a sophisticated version of that and a naive version of this. Like, you know, there's nothing to stop you creating this for yourself. Like, because this could be as simple as like, I've got a Word document of like everything that I need to learn, and I'll load that into the LLM, and then I'll update it, and like it can track my progress against it. You can do these things naively. You don't have to go to the full like end game of like graph databases and flying through nodes and edges and stuff. Like, you know, that's just probably like how you would want to build this out at like top end to do a really good product. But you can start experimenting with these things, and you can have it teach you anything. You can just learn things, which I think is that's a good message. And I think this is like one of the things that will remain as well. Just to go back to the original topic, with like, I think we're going to have to do stuff, and we're probably going to need to learn things. So, you know, we'll still be able to learn stuff with AI. So we potentially may have a lot of time in order to learn stuff. So you can just learn stuff.
Maybe that's where the big compound benefit emerges as well. It's like we don't yet know what we can create or what we might build because we haven't given ourselves the time and the freedom to go and explore those things and to spend the time learning and building our own skills. And to some degree there is this question of which skills are important, which we kind of keep dancing around. But yeah, I just think it's going to provide this massive unlock just at a personal level. The ability to go and like follow your own intellectual pursuits whenever you fancy. I think that's going to be incredible. But like everything,
I'm a fan.
We might end up in this bifurcated state, just like when we talk about like businesses adopting AI from a purely productivity perspective. We can see that there's like maybe a bifurcated track where you have businesses that embrace the stuff and businesses that don't, and then there's this like long tail decline, or maybe it's a short tail decline depending on which industry you're in, for the businesses that don't embrace it. And similarly, maybe there's a case of like, you know, you don't need to seek permission from anybody to go and learn. You can literally learn whatever you want, whatever interests you, whenever you want. But if you don't, you know, what does that mean? There's probably people who just won't, and maybe that's fine. And there are people that will take full advantage of this and will just go nuts, and that's fine too. So, like always, there's maybe like a bit of a bifurcated state that begins to emerge as well. But yeah, I think this is something on a lot of people's minds, especially with kids. This is just something that does tend to come up certainly in my circles, where people are always curious. It's like, well, I don't really know what to tell them either. Like it must be really hard because, for such a long time we've just had like, a defined track. We haven't really had to think this stuff in the kind of the post-war world.
Yeah.
So it's a huge divergence now, potentially. Hugely disruptive one.
Yeah, I wonder if people like this, like it sounds weird to even say this because it seems natural, but I wonder if people don't know how to learn stuff with AIs in the same way that like sometimes you do need a bit of a push to how to use these things. I mean, we've talked a lot about you get that sort of cold start problem. Like, I always used to think of like command line interfaces as tangent. Like they're great because you can do anything in them, but they were crap because you needed to know everything that you could do before you did anything, and so they were very confusing to people. I think if LLMs can do a lot of stuff, and particularly if you think about how you use it ahead of time, but the problem with that is you need to know how to think about how to do it to make it do the thing that you want to do, or to put that sort of tooling and scaffolding together in a way to make it do the thing that you want to do. And I wonder if like there's like an element there where people just need to be taught a little bit as well, that like you can make this is how you turn this thing into a teacher. This is the sort of information it needs, these are the sort of prompts that you want to use. Like, I wonder if that could be useful.
There's the blank screen problem, right? I think that's what you're describing, where you're just like, what do I type in here, what do I even need to
that's why they put the starter prompts on.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, clearly this thing seems to be like very useful to me. All right, what should I do? Do my job. Shit, it didn't do my job. Like, I'm still here. What's going on? But
I think sometimes as well, like I find, this is just me personally, but I find that learning occurs just organically. Like I don't often set out to go, I want to learn a thing. Sometimes it will just be like I'm reading something else and I'm like, oh, I don't really understand what this is saying. Let me just throw it into the model, and then I'll go off on a conversation with the model. And, that for me is like essentially a one-to-one tutor. But I didn't set out to just go, I need to learn a thing. So in that respect, I kind of use it as like, there's a tutor just always on my screen, and I use it when I need to use it. Other times I'll have a problem. There's started using, obviously for the pod, using things like CapCut, and I just never used it before. So I'll run into a pain point where I'm like, how do I do this thing? And I'll just like get Claude or ChatGPT to walk me through the steps of how to do the thing. And so that's really handy, and that's learning as well, because now I'm able to get up to speed on how to use some of these tools and interfaces in a much more efficient way. I don't need to sit and watch a YouTube video like I might have in the past and spent an hour or two trying to solve this problem, hoping that someone else has had the same problem, which they often do. Whereas now I can just get straight to the step-by-step answer as well. And so some of it is born out of interest, some of it is born out of pain, and some of it is born out of curiosity. And I think that is like a nice melting pot for learning anyway.
Necessity, pain, and curiosity.
Yeah,
definitely. I mean, people like, this was when I've had sales training in the past from like people that get paid an awful lot of money to teach you sales training, and it was always, look, you got to remember that people will move away from pain way quicker than they will move towards pleasure. Pleasure is a great motivator. Pain is better. Like, if you can take away a pain point from somebody, they will just bite your arm off for it. So I guess we'll see like how motivating that becomes in the future for learning. But certainly it gives you, it clarifies, right? Like if you're feeling pain on something, you don't know how to do something, then you have somewhere where you can turn and say, do you know how to do this? And it'll go, yes, you would approach it like this. This is how you would do it. And you go, oh, fantastic. And then now you're in a learning mode with that AI tool because you didn't know how to do it and you were experiencing the pain of not being able to get it done. Like with the coding sort of stuff.
Yes.
Like, this isn't working. Like, how do I learn to make this work? It's like, can you fix it? And it goes, tries to fix it, doesn't work. So you're like, oh shit, like, okay. So number 2 is like, okay, well, now can I understand what is going wrong and maybe I can fix it. So
yeah,
I think there's
sometimes also it's just breaking the project, right? I mean, I've done this a bunch of times as well, where I've potentially just vibe coded a little too hard, and then I've hit a block where I just cannot fix this for the life of me.
Yeah.
You know, I will change up models as well. Like, I'm like, okay, Claude 3.7, you've clearly failed me. Let me bring in Gemini to fix your mistakes. You know, go through the code, tell me why this isn't working, fix it, doesn't fix it, can't do it. And you get to a point where you're like, okay, screw it, I'm just going to start from scratch.
Yeah.
But the thing is, if you've been paying attention, like, and using this in a proactive way, rather than just I'm just going to let it write all the code. If you use it proactively, you can get to a point where you're like, yeah, I'm starting again, but I'm not starting from scratch.
No.
I'm learning the lessons for why this failed the last time, and I'm going to avoid it.
Yes.
You know, and like, so one of the things that I find myself doing now is I will spend so much more time setting up a project before I even get into Cursor. You know, like, I'll be thinking about like what are the things I need to consider that I'm not even considering right now. It starts from an idea. And I'll go and I'll work with Claude on this stuff, or ChatGPT, and I'll get the ideas out, and then I'll take all of those ideas and features and how it all flows together, and I'll put it into a PRD, and then, you know, that is great. Like, when I first started this, I had no idea what that was. You know, like, it's just the manner of thinking about this and planning out what you want to build and deconstructing it into a set of logical steps. I guess you might call that a roadmap. These are all things I was like, oh, I just wasn't thinking about this before.
Yeah.
And now this feels like a really logical way to build something. And then I'm using the model to, like, Claude on the side to walk me through what's actually happening. And I think, like, I'm fairly confident this will accelerate my own development to get to a point where I can natively code something if I want to. Which is just huge, because for years and years and years I just kept hitting my head against a brick wall, going like, I'm just not learning this. Why do I feel so stupid every time I try to code something? And that was just a language, a syntax problem. And similarly with learning French, right? That was a syntax problem. Like, I wasn't getting immersion, and I was trying to learn that language in the abstract. Whereas now you can literally talk to a voice model and learn the language. Again, infinite amounts of patience. This thing isn't going to cut you off. It's not going to tell you to fuck off. You're just going to...
Doesn't get bored of you.
Yeah,
it's just crap.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that immersive quality, I think, is like the key to learning this stuff. And add the kind of gamified elements on top of that as well. Like, something as simple as like tracking your GitHub commits and feeling that like dopamine hit when you get the green box is just like magical. Maybe that wears off, I don't know, but for me right now it's cool. So there's that too. Fun engagement. We hadn't planned on this at all, but yeah.
No,
I think it's an important aspect of the stuff.
Like, this is a good chat. It's got me thinking a lot about it. I haven't really been thinking about the learning stuff recently, but you got me. It's a sub-component of the stuff I was building with Beacon that I'd had in mind. So you got me wondering about how else I can use that, like what other products that we could ship. So
inevitably, we're going to come up with stuff we want to build around
no,
this.
I've got a few things, but we'll not do that on the pod right now.
Yes.
But save that for a future thing. But I thought it was good. I like it. You can just learn stuff.
You can just learn stuff. Right. That's probably a nice wrap.
Yep, that's the good stuff.